Thank you so much. And I just wanted to start out by saying good afternoon and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. Just to sort of piggyback off of what Erica has said, my name is Eamon Ducci. I am the founder and a managing partner at ShiftRight Consulting. We are a human capital consulting firm with a passion for change. So ShiftRight was really born out of my desire to help really great organizations make changes that actually stick. Our ethos is grounded in the belief that change done well is change made easy. And so when we were approached to talk about what do mining organizations need to think about to prepare for 2030, almost instantaneously, our thoughts went to automation, the future of work, and what that would mean for mining organizations in 2030. So that is really what our topic will explore with you today, and very much open to your questions. So feel free to interject if you have any as we go through this data. Okay. Okay, so when we think about 2030, possibly one of the most immediate goals that spring to mind is the decarbonization challenge and the goal to getting to net zero. And when we think about the energy transition, I think it's unavoidable that we start to think about the implications it has to the future of work, not just in mining, but across multiple different industries. So unsurprisingly, the World Economic Forum has said that it is expected that the number of remote mining workers will approach 60% in the next decade. And by 2040, it will be even higher. So as we think about that, we also have to consider emerging advances in automation and AI are pointing to a future with a radical shift in the skill sets required to support the new digital operating models and remote mining and ways of working. And the skill sets that are going to be in highest demand, as I'm sure you've heard in the morning session, and again now in the afternoon session, is unsurprisingly in robotics, in automation, in engineering, and in machine learning and data analytics. So the statistics that we see here, and I'm sure that you've heard previously, paint a picture of a future that requires immediate change. And if we go through them just very quickly, 73% of mining companies see local skill gaps as being the biggest barrier to adopting new technology, and that is according to the World Economic Forum. And 86% of change, again, unsurprisingly, has been driven by technological and digital advancements. By 2030, the Mining Industry HR Council has estimated that about 80 to 120,000 new hires will be required in mining. And this is an interesting juxtaposition when we think about a lot of what we're hearing in terms of the declining interest in mining, particularly for the younger generation. And so the same council has said about 70% of individuals surveyed between the ages of 15 to 30 would not consider a career in mining. So as we're thinking about the increased demand and the, let's say, declining interest, what we're also seeing is this increased need for very specialized skill sets. So 30% of the manual tasks are expected to be displaced by 2030, and many of these roles are then going to be highly skilled. So we are definitely at a crossroads, is how I would say it. We're operating at a time where traditional mining skills are being supplemented with a range of new in-demand skills. At the same time, the way that mining is being done is changing fundamentally, and as a result, the skill sets required to address them are changing. We're also seeing that the industry is contending with more stringent reporting, as we have heard when it comes to ESG and adherence requirements. And with this focus on getting to net zero, miners will have to ramp up their production to meet the rising demand for critical minerals as we move to the energy transition. But this is also as they must reduce their carbon emissions. So we can see that there's an interplay of a number of conflicting priorities and expectations as we look to 2020, 2030 and beyond. So this leads us to a question, well, what does that mean for me as a mining leader? And specifically, you've heard a lot about the war for talent. And so the first thing I would want to say is that when you think about the war for talent, one of the first things we have to recognize is that that war is no longer just limited to your industry. So the skills that we spoken about when it comes to AI, when it comes to machine learning, when it comes to data analytics, these are skills that are going to be naturally in demand across a number of different industries. And so when we're trying to attract this talent that we need for the future, we have to recognize that the way that we start to develop our strategy needs to be uplifted beyond just your industry to look across the industry at those best practices. But before we get there, I just want to talk a little bit about, how do we bridge the gap? And what is it really that the talent of the future and your existing talent is looking for? So, one of the things you would have consistently heard through the course of today is that the employee value proposition in mining has started to deteriorate. And this is showing up in industry data, as we've just seen with some of the statistics we presented. But in order to understand how we bridge the gap, we have to first understand what are the components of an employee value proposition. So the best way that I would describe it is think of your employee value proposition as what your talent looks for in a prospective employer. So it's the initial encounter a prospective employee has with your organization all the way through to their retirement. And if you look at the graphic on the screen that I have here, I would say your employee value proposition is essentially comprised of three key elements. There is an emotional element, and so this really speaks to purpose and belonging and will be very unique depending on the individual in your organization. You also have the experiential level, and this is the experience that they have in their career, in their day-to-day work. And then you have the contractual level, and that is really their compensation and their benefits. So essentially, each of the different aspects of your employee value proposition is directly and explicitly as well as implicitly affected by your culture, the development opportunities you provide your talent, as well as your recognition mechanisms. So when we look at the emotional, unsurprisingly, elements of your culture play a big part. And again, I'm sure you've heard thematically through the course of today a lot of the things that the talent of the future, but equally your existing talent have a focus on is diversity and inclusion, non-invasive environmental practices when it comes to the future of work, particularly in industries like mining and oil and gas. How do you create a sense of well-being and purpose? A differentiated employee value proposition that's reflected of the diverse talent that you're trying to attract. So a lot of these things require a recognition that what is needed in the future may not necessarily resemble what looked like in the past, and an openness and willingness to actually engage in what that dialogue looks like. Similarly, when we look at our career, a lot of what that is affected by is the day-to-day interactions as well as opportunities. So development opportunities that span not just the vertical traditional paths of promotion, but lateral opportunities, opportunities to develop the skill sets that can kind of bridge multiple functional areas. And learning and development opportunities. So I think, unfortunately, one of the things that might be a little bit of a stigma associated with some industries that are more traditional is this idea that the way we used to do it is always going to be the way that we do it. But it has become obvious as we move to the new ways of working that learning and development has got to become non-negotiable. This idea of lifelong learning has to be ingrained in all aspects of your organization, from the initial hire through the development, through your succession planning. And it's critical because those skills are going to be evolving as the ways of working are changing. And then finally, when it comes to recognition, that's the final component of the employee value proposition. And unsurprisingly, compensation is a large part of it. And so as we talked about the war of talent and the idea that you can no longer look at talent and that war as being limited to your industry, equally when it comes to the compensation, we need to be thinking about this beyond just the industry norms, right? Because you are going to be trying to attract the talent that will be in demand across multitude of industries. So the way that you're looking at compensation, the way that you're looking at intrinsic as well as extrinsic rewards for your employee base, things like flexible working arrangements, cross-pooling of resources, benefits and compensation, flexible work arrangements, all of this collectively essentially addresses or identifies gaps in your employee value proposition. And sitting above all of this, which is what I've sort of articulated on the right side of the slide, is this focus on leadership. So the vision of your organization, management, and it all kind of comes together. Okay, I see that we have 10 minutes. I've covered 10 minutes. So I'm just quickly going to go through. So how do we bridge some of these gaps? So these are just some of the initial things, but obviously what we need to do is what are some things that will have immediate actionable results? And one of the things we need to think about is how we move from siloed-based functional role training to cross-functional multi-skilling and competency building. So ensuring that you're developing a skill set that is specialized, but is equally generalist enough that it can span across multiple areas of your organization. We talked a little bit about rethinking the paths of development so that it's not linear and focused just on hierarchy, but that there are opportunities for lateral career development and specialist tracks. Equally, the idea of looking beyond the geographic boundaries of your organization and encouraging global mobility, particularly in areas that might be more remote for attracting the type of talent that you want. And then rethinking your talent pipelines. So rather than focusing merely on traditional talent sourcing strategies, think of non-traditional talent pipelines. So Artemis is a great example of a women-owned business ecosystem that you can tap into to supplement your talent. But you can also think about cross-industry pooled partnerships. And this is something that we're seeing from a trend perspective, particularly with the OEMs, where they are starting to look at opportunities to cross-collaborate by using pooled resources to address the crunch that's likely to happen. And finally, upskilling your local communities. So in the past, the focus has really been on helping them understand the skills required to do relatively manual labor tasks. And as we think about the future, I think it's a great indication if the mining leaders of the future were to take a stance, but they're investing in the long-term strategic skill sets that are needed in the local communities when it comes to things like engineering, robotics, and data literacy. That puts you ahead of the curve. By investing in those communities, you are already sourcing a pipeline of talent that exists where you need it. And equally, I would just echo some of the sentiments that some of the other women mentioned in terms of, educating and showcasing the demonstrable moves you've made when it comes to closing the gender divide, when it comes to addressing DE&I, but these have to be actionable and they have to be relevant, right? And showcasing your narrative, so telling your story in a compelling way to attract the type of talent that you want in your organization. Because while the road is long, it's equally important to start to change the narrative and reframe some of the big wins that mining has been able to accomplish across the last couple of years. And that will also be a critical part of telling your story and attracting the type of talent you want. This is my final slide, but it was really just our top 5 in terms of if we were a mining organization, what would we see as some of our key priorities? I've touched on a number of these. One of the ones I would say is, become an early adopter, invest in leading technology that will become an industry standard as we move through the energy transition. Shift your talent horizon so that it is taking a longer term strategic look versus more siloed, limited 1 to 3 year outlook. We talked about education. And finally, I mentioned cultivating the cross-industry STEM and OEM partnerships and multi-pronged advocacy to put you in the running of the future. And I'm just going to stop because I think I want to give some time to any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Eamon. And